these are the 5 elements, and I'm going to talk about how we work with and use this model in acupuncture. Now, the 5 elements represent all of life, all of being. Everything that we experience can be described and explained through an understanding of the 5 elements. And we can then use this model to understand our patients and what their needs are, to understand ourselves and what our contribution to the dynamics is, but also to some extent to plan treatments. But they certainly are a way of understanding the rhythm and nature of life. And the origin of the 5 elements is observing nature itself, human nature, animal nature, and the planet. And one of the easiest ways to start doing that is to start looking at the correspondences or what's associated with each of these elements and relating them to things that we already know about and have experienced for ourselves. And the first easiest thing to do that with is the seasons, because these elements represent the different seasons of the year and also the different directions on the compass. So for example, the water element here represents the winter time and the north and everything you would associate with winter. The fire element here, the summertime in the south and everything you would associate with summer. Not just the climate, of course, but how you actually feel in the summer, how you actually feel in the winter. That will be different for everyone, but there'll be some similarities, I expect. Wood element representing the springtime, and the metal element representing the autumn time or fall. Question is, what then does the earth represent? And I'll talk about that in a moment. But these elements, this is a model of life, and these elements have this cycle going round, these arrows going round in a clockwise direction. This is called the Sheng cycle, or the generating cycle, or possibly the nurturing cycle, or maybe even the tonification cycle. So the implication here is that each element is having a relationship with the following element and the previous element. And a good way of understanding that is to think about them as people. So if you think about the earth element, for example, as a person, it has a parent, fire, and a child, metal. So again, we can begin to think about what the relationships between parents and children are like. Generally, we have to look after our children, and we are looked after by our parents. So this gives some insight into the way that this energy is moving around in this clockwise direction in a mutually supportive way, this Sheng cycle. And we can in fact theoretically, although not always in practice, but definitely theoretically, use that Sheng cycle in planning the way we do treatments. So if, for example, we know what parts of the body or what organ systems or what type of energy of a person, because it could be any or all of or a combination of those, if we know where the problem is, let's take an easy example. Let's say it's a problem with the stomach, which belongs within the earth element. Then we can say, well, if the stomach's weak, it's going to affect its child, who won't be so well supplied, and possibly its parent who's asked for more. But what we can also do is we can use that model. We can say, here is our stomach meridian belonging to earth, and on that meridian there will be a combination of points. There will be an earth point, a metal point, a water point, a wood point, and a fire point. And this is the same for all the meridians. All the meridians have got 5 element points on them. So 1 belonging to them and 4 belonging to the other elements. We can take the fire point on the earth meridian and stick a needle in it in order to encourage fire energy to supply the earth. And this would be known as a tonification technique. bringing the energy of the mother or parent to support the child. And that's the most basic fundamental understanding of the way tonification works. There are other ways that tonification works, but that's the most basic and simple one, and it's a good principle to understand in terms of the way the elements mutually support one another. The elements also have another relationship, as you can see, going like this. And this is called the control cycle. Remember, these are just words. They don't necessarily mean what we might associate with control. And a way of understanding that is to think of it as the grandparent. So if we go back and we're the earth element again, there's our parent, there's our child, and there is our grandparent exerting an influence upon us. So in this sort of family model, one can see how, in theory at least, if the earth was finding it difficult to look after its child metal, then possibly the grandparent would come in and exert some influence, keep the child under control, if we're using the word control, or supply the child or give some guidance to the child perhaps in some other way to help its own child. So all the time there's this mutual support network that's going on through the elements. Let's just talk a little bit more about those seasonal correspondences and how Earth comes to be stuck out there, not really having a season, although it's given the season of late summer. That's just been stuck in there. How have they done that? That is a relatively recent, in terms of the evolution of Chinese medicine, a relatively recent change, because the Earth started off in the middle. And that's because if you imagine for a moment that you are going back in history a few thousand years into the evolution of humanity, there must have been a time or a period of time when human beings first started to develop an independent consciousness. In other words, saw themselves as separate from the planet, saw themselves as observing from inside themselves what was outside of themselves. And that's something which animals don't do. There must have been a time that began to happen. And once you do that, you can appreciate that you're standing on the earth, observing what's outside of you. And the most observable things would have been the sun, the moon, the horizon, the daytime, the nighttime, and the different directions, and where the sun came up and where it went down. And it wouldn't be that long before you started inventing things called seasons, and then things called days and years, and before you know where you are, you've invented time, because everything that we experience in this thing we call time. And the earth element then was in the center, because it was from where we were standing and observing things. So it's always important to remember when you're looking at the elements that the earth element, we've got it here for the purposes of a good model that we can use, but it still represents the earth, the place where we're standing, and actually then our physical bodies, doesn't it? Because our physical body is made from the substances of the earth. Everything that we are physically is a representation of the earth. And so there we have the earth put there and called late summer. This is a way of understanding life. It doesn't exist in the absolute. We call it 5 elements, but some people call it 5 phases, because it's talking very much about change and movement and progression. Nothing ever stays the same. Things are in constant flux and constant change, as you've witnessed in your own life, as you witness the passage of time through the seasons, through the years. Now, these elements have all the climatic associations that you'd associate with them. They have also organs or officials associated with them as well. And over time, as you study acupuncture, you begin to build a little bit of a relationship with what these, not only what these elements represent and belong to, but how they feel. And so you can already start with that to some degree by saying that you definitely could say we all feel very different in the winter than we do in the summer. And we can also say that we experience these transitions from the winter coming into spring and what that feels like. What does that energy feel like? Woody energy. It feels spring-like. It's about change. It's about hope. It's about optimism. It's about birth. So it's about this seed springing up from the ground, or this chick breaking out of the egg. It's a very dynamic energy, whereas the water energy is much more quiet and contemplative and hidden away, hibernating, if you like, as energy feels in the winter. What does the energy feel like in the summer? Expansive and warm and all-embracing. What does it feel like in the autumn? It feels that things are closing down and things are being let go of and things are going back into the ground. So we can already say that we have a little bit of a feel for these elements just on the basis of our own experience of our own lives, each of which will be unique, but we can certainly discuss them. I mean, not many people are going to say, I don't think, that they feel like leaping around and jumping for joy outside in the winter in the same way that they would in the summer, for example. And we can begin to then recognize these energies, or these types of energy in life, in people, and when they're, if you like, feeling natural and in the right context, and when they're, for example, not quite so natural and not in the right context. And that's when we can begin to start seeing disease or dis-ease, because what we're going to be observing is, if this element wood is making itself predominant all the time, that wouldn't be natural, would it? It's not springtime all the time, is it? So we can be beginning to observe imbalances within these elements that we can then possibly begin to address with techniques like tonification. And so you need to just start learning the correspondences to each of these elements, which are all easily located charts of that. You already know everything that's associated with the seasons, but then you need to know which organs, officials, will be associated with those elements, so that you can get familiar with that. You know, the stomach and spleen here, the lung and colon here, the kidney and bladder here, the liver, gallbladder here, and the heart and small intestine here. So you're beginning to get a feel that, you know, the heart is about the summertime, the kidneys are about the winter time, and that will serve you well. We can then develop that forever. We can talk not only about the physical qualities or the physicality of these different organs and belonging to these elements. We can also talk about the emotional characteristics that they have, and ultimately the spiritual dimension to them as well. So we can begin to influence, or at least understand, life in a more developed, more dynamic way that relates directly to acupuncture, because we're relating this directly to our organs, officials in the body, to our meridians, and to our acupuncture points. Because we've got earth points, fire points, metal points. We've also got, you know, different types of points, but we can make these relationships to the elements, and that can be a very good start to ways of working with acupuncture. So I hope you're finding this interesting and useful. Please subscribe and like, and I'll see you for the next video.